Zero trust. Does it mean you can't trust anyone? How does that work? Or are we moving trust elsewhere and pretend it doesn't exist? It's a very interesting topic, so let's dive in. An organization that doesn't trust anyone will cease to exist because it won't be able to produce anything. So, what exactly is the goal? The last few years, companies realized that the trust they had on its employees might actually be a risk. They can be engaged directly through phishing, bribes, and many other vectors, which may in the end compromise the organization itself. So in reality, zero trust is not that doesn't trust anyone, but trust on someone. Now, who that someone will be? Who gets to make the approvals? It's unlikely to be a single individual, because if that individual goes on vacation, gets sick, or whatever, the entire operation stops. So that's an unlikely scenario. So we started off as something that trust on someone, and we're already trusting at least more than one person. This is not going to be a highly complex task. And usually monetary value inside organizations are tied to complexity. So the technical requirements for these tasks alone are not high. One needs to find a profile of an employee with a good judgment, understanding of the risks in the environment to approve everyone's access requests, and doesn't get bored with the task. So let's consider a few options. A highly technical person. Would it be good at this position? It might get bored. And there are a number of solutions: expanding the number of individuals in this trust circle, or use the lower tiers of the organization for that, which would by itself bring additional risks. So in the end, we might create a chain of approvals, a multi-tiered system. Otherwise, we're left with the option of considering someone for the task based on the risk that it represents for the organization itself. And that not only would be unfair, it won't sit well with employees themselves. So we're more likely to end up in a multi-tiered system, which for something that was described as trust no one is already becoming quite complex. Okay, is there a scenario where we can see this to be applicable in any way, shape, or form? Actually, it's probably one of those examples where organizations might have a wake-up call. You see, smaller organizations often are translating to many advantages: smaller groups, simpler systems, more prone to task sharing, less people involved, which in turn usually means less delays or work, in the end, more productive. We are constantly driven at this point. We're already driven into something that is making us realize that we have a good idea with the wrong name. And this is why I believe that this type of system is better described as the circles of trust, and not zero trust. Now, platforms themselves might have flaws, and we see in a number of cases where that was explored, and you end up with a serious problem. So what are the advantages of this? Are there, if there are any? Well, accountability. It's carefully logged automatically by the process itself. Auditing for auditing purposes is awesome. You have a chain of approval, who get access to what in what time frame, and for that you can understand what type of information was involved. Is less prone to misconfigurations, right? Especially at privilege level. However, this is another example that ignores human reality. Okay? Because users will react to any roadblock, but more about that later. Okay, how about its contributions for an incident response? We're faced with something that has very good auditing capabilities, or at least offers that. So it may be helpful, at least at the trace level, trace the access and the far reach. If we consider the lower privileged scenarios, it provides some relevant understanding of the resources and the chain of approval. However, most of the pain incident response wise is that understanding where the storm has started and actually where most of the mistakes are made. So if we consider bigger organizations, we may identify most of its flaws more easily, especially if we start to consider time zones. Here, things are more likely to fail. Delays between the request and the approval will grow and may grow to a point where it might represent a productivity roadblock. Into that situation where company gets hacked, and from now on we have a number of rules that need to be established. You need to lock and unlock your file, and will have an effect on your productivity. At the end of the year, that will have a very practical effect, and one that users will act or react to. So we're likely to end up in situations where unknown or alternative methods of storing or sharing information are sought or found or identified by the employees. That is an unknown method. And chances are it's going to be a lot more dangerous than the other than the other option. Okay? So anything that has a consequence on one's productivity, especially at this in this kinds of scenarios, are usually not very well received. Okay, so what are the options here? One of the options is to expand the circle of trust for a bigger and more complicated system of approval. We've seen examples of this, similar examples of it, not necessarily for zero trust, but it's key to a situation where SOC escalates an event, it goes through a chain of approval, and by the end of that chain usually means the threat actor already has complete control of the environment. I've seen that happen a number of times. We're talking about the situations where the chain of approval itself is so long and so complicated that will have an impact, a negative impact, and one that will be translated into the loss of productivity. So what the other option is? The other option is to accept the loss of productivity or the motivation drop, or revert back to a more simpler approach. Whatever the case it may be, it is an interesting challenge. In the end, it means that zero trust needs trust. So the real question is, what are we lying to? See you on the next one.